I want to talk about ministering to those folks who are on psychological drugs or psychotropic drugs, however you want to say the word. We live in a psychologized world, well, let me read the scripture that I have here first. No longer drink only water, but use a little wine for the sake of your stomach and your frequent ailments. So he's telling them to drink wine. And it's medicinal for your stomach and your frequent ailments. Is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there? Why then has the health of the daughter of my people not been restored? So we have doctors. For thus says the Lord, your hurt is incurable and your wound is grievous. There is none to uphold your cause, no medicine for your wound, no healing for you. So those are passages about scripture or medicine. We live in a psychologized culture. It's difficult to turn our TVs on or listen to the radio without coming across some psychologist or self-help guru preaching their wares and philosophies about how we should live and why. And we just have, and that's true across the board. We have psychologists at one end that are clearly psychologists, then we have Christians at the other end who aren't all that clearly Christian oftentimes. And then we have everything in the middle. So we have guys like Jordan Peterson, who's not a Christian, at least yet, and everybody's hoping, oh, he's so close. And his daughter just came out, I hate that phrase, came out as a Christian recently. But he would be over here somewhere. He thinks a lot of the same things Christians think about a lot of things. He's just not a Christian. So, but I do think that that's dangerous, really, because a lot of Christians who read his stuff, and he says it so well, that they buy into him instead of what he's saying, and they don't pay attention, and they go along, and they're just Peterson fans. And I've read a book or two by him, and he is really sharp and really right and really good, but it's still part of the psychologized world. He's not a believer. So in our day, to live lives we encounter, in our day-to-day lives, we encounter many people who have bought into the lie that counseling psychology has the answers to all of our problems. Now, I'm not against psychology in general. For example, I like the psychology that salespeople use to get people to buy their products. I just think that's cool. Like why McDonald's is colored the way it is and why nice restaurants are colored the way they are. McDonald's is bright orange and yellow, I guess, and you go, and Burger King and those places, and they're designed that way to get you in there to have a good time, but they're also designed that way to get you out of there because you've had a good time. You can't stand the colors for very long. You have to get away. It's just all crazy. But that's something they thought about. People have thought about that stuff. Or when I was in college, we did an experiment with little kids. We had, my girlfriend at the time had a niece. I think it was a niece. Yeah, and then there was some neighbors that had a little boy. They were the same age, around in the twos, I think. And we went over to their house and we did an experiment with marbles. And we had a whole bunch of marbles, and we took the marbles and we told the little kids to put the marbles in some kind of order together, arrange these marbles. And the first time we did it, I don't remember how the order was, but they put all the orange ones in a group, and they put all the green ones in a group, and all the blue ones in a group, and all the red ones in a group. They grouped them by color. And then another time that we went over, a few weeks later, we said, put all these in a group, and we gave them to them in a big pile. And they put a red one, and a green one, and a blue one, and an orange one, and a red one, and a green one, and a blue one, and an orange one. They grouped them that way. They put one color in each group. And that was showing somehow that their brains had developed a little bit and they had learned new things and they were organizing things in different orders. And that meant something in the way that their minds were developing. I just thought that kind of stuff is cool. But counseling psychology, I'm against that. It leads us away from God, away from true psychology, which the psychology means the study of the soul. Psyche is the word soul, which is where we get the psych part of ology, and ology is where we get the word logic from, and so it's the study of the soul. And really, psychology, non-Christian psychology, doesn't give us any lasting help. It makes us think we're getting that lasting help, but it doesn't give us real help. And it leads us away from God. And I believe, and we can talk about this some more later, I've already talked about it in another talk, psychology is actually, it's a different religion. It's a religious system that's in opposition to Christianity or any other religious system. It's its own system. And so when Christians do psychology, they're participating in another world system. And that's why when Christians who do psychology do it, they end up being psychologists, not Christians. So you have a Christian psychologist like James Dobson, who's who's probably a wonderful Christian man, but all of his stuff is psychology. It's not biblical. And you can just list any number of Christian psychologists who call themselves Christians, and I don't doubt that they are, but what they're doing when they start counseling is psychology, not biblical. They might have Bible stuff in there. So you read stuff like by Minirth Meyer, and their stuff there's Bible all through it, but the Bible is usually, or is always, virtually always, illustrates their point that they got out of psychology. So it would be similar to a Christian using Buddhism or something like that in their worship of God. These Buddhists have a great idea, let's use that. But what happens there is, like in Israel, when the Israelites tried to worship Yahweh and Baal at the same time, their worship was watered down. The worship of Yahweh was watered down, and they ended up worshiping Baal and not Yahweh, and God was never happy with that. That was always a bad thing. And so psychology is like that. So it leads us away from God and from true psychology, away from lasting help and real healing. So like the woman in Mark 9 who had been bleeding all those past 12 years, who had been to every doctor of every kind, but to no avail, and who finally sought help from Jesus. So others come to us with their pain and suffering, needing to hear a word from Jesus. So how do we help people who are taking medication as a means of living with their situation? So we'll have people, I remember looking on Facebook and a woman, there was a picture of a woman's hand, and in her hand was antidepressants and birth control pills. This was a Christian, she says she's a Christian. And I think, and I don't know this for sure, but I keep hearing that a lot of people in our church are doing that. And I don't know that those are the same meds, but there's a lot of people in our church who are taking antidepressants and a lot of other kinds of psychotropic medication for the ailments that they have because they've been seeing doctors and psychologists and stuff in the area. And I just think that's really, really dangerous. But as I've said before, when we run into those folks, we don't just say, stop it, don't do that, because they need to get weaned off it sometimes. Sometimes those medications are strong enough that if you just stopped it, you'd be in serious trouble. So anyway, so how do we minister to folks who are taking medications? There are two popular methodologies or schools of thought concerning how to diagnose a person who is ill, either physically or mentally, the medical and the psychiatric. In the world of medicine, a body has a disease if something has been introduced to it from an outside source. There's an organic cause resulting in some behavioral problems, but these organic causes are found through medical testing. So if you have the COVID virus, for example, they can take a test and see if you have it. They don't purely say, "Ooh, you're coughing," and well, they wouldn't even know if you have a fever yet. You're coughing, and yes, you feel warm. But then they do another test to find out that you actually have COVID, right? They have a test to tell you that that's what you have. And the same thing with other diseases. I have cancer, they did a test. They did a bunch of tests to say that you have cancer. Because if they just ask me, do you feel bad, do you have cancer? I would say, no, I don't have cancer. What are you talking about? I'm good. But they did a bunch of physical tests, scientific tests that are testable. They could do a test in one hospital. I could go to another one, they could do another test, and they would have the same results. They're the same kinds of things. That's what the medical field does. There's organic causes. There's stuff going on that's physical. These tests show physical evidence and describe a disease within the body rather than reports about body functions or feelings from the patient alone. So there's feelings that go with it. I really hurt right here. If you go to a medical doctor and you say, I really hurt right here, they run a bunch of tests to see why you hurt right here. They don't just make up stuff and say, well, people who hurt right there generally have this. They go, well, people who are hurt right there generally have this, but let's run some tests and see if that's really what you have, right? To qualify as an illness, the condition in question must show damage to the body's physical tissue or something like that. In the world of psychiatry and psychology, the diagnoses are made on the basis of the reported behavior and feelings and thought processes of the counselee or client or patient, and they're not testable or verifiable at all. You say, I hurt right here. And they say, oh, you hurt right there. You have whatever. And then you go to a different one and you say, I hurt right here. And they might tell you you have something completely different than the first guy because there's no tests for it. It's totally subjective. There's no objective thing going on at all. Now, generally speaking, like for example, next door here, there's I've seen a sign on the window. I don't know. I've never been there. I don't know who it is. There's someone who does aromatherapy. And I've read about it a little bit, that aromatherapy helps people with their personal problems and their problems in life by smells and meditation and stuff like that. It's an Eastern sort of thing. You light incense and you have smells and you rub stuff on you and you have oils and all that kind of stuff. But it's all about the idea that the way our brains work and the way our bodies work can be changed and connect. Anyway, we're all connected with the universe and the cosmos, and it has to do with aromas. It's very Eastern, sort of comes out of an Eastern philosophy. And at the end of the day, all of psychology comes out of some kind of philosophy. When I was in college, my goal when I got out of the Navy was to go to school and major in psychology as an undergrad, and then go to school and get a master's degree in theology, so I would know what the Bible was about, and then go on and get a PhD in psychology, so I could minister the way I'm ministering now in terms of counseling. So I got to college my first year and realized pretty quickly that psychology was just applied philosophy. So I said to myself, Mike, I wasn't Dr. Lawyer yet, Mike, you need to change your major and study philosophy, because that's where psychology comes from. So let's study that first. So I changed my major to philosophy, got a degree in philosophy. And then got a degree in theology, and then forgot all about the whole plan, and anyway, that's another story. But psychology is just applied philosophy. So, in the world of psychiatry, diagnoses are made on the basis of reported behavior or feelings or thought processes of the counselee, and they're not testable or verifiable for the behavior. There are no tests or verifiable ways of knowing what you have. Various theories are proposed to account for the behavior, but there's no scientific test given to justify their conclusions. What they do is they have your symptoms, and then they have these brackets that they put over the symptoms, and those brackets have labels that say what you have. You have OCD, you have ADHD, you have whatever that happens to be. And sometimes you have people who can go to this psychologist over here with these set of symptoms, and this psychologist over here, and one will put the brackets here and one will put the brackets here. And so you could come out with two totally separate things, and then you could go a third guy who puts the bracket here, and it covers both of them. So when you read about different people's psychological evaluations and announcements, sometimes they combine different things, and oftentimes, probably maybe usually, the symptoms will all line up, and everybody will say that you wash your hands 80 times a day, you probably have OCD, right? So they fit. But then there's other times when the symptoms are so many that there's so many symptoms in, say, schizophrenia. There's so many symptoms that you could have a person who's being diagnosed with schizophrenia who have this set of symptoms, and another one who's being diagnosed with schizophrenia who has this set of symptoms, and they have no symptoms in common, which just strikes me as odd, a little bit odd. But that's the system. That's how it works. To contrast the two schools of thought, in medicine, a disease produces physical and testable symptoms. Also in medicine, there's no moral implications directly related to the disease or illness. In psychiatry or psychology, symptoms show the theory, and virtually all mental illness includes a moral component. In other words, when a person has polio, diabetes, or AIDS, the disease does not cause the person to sin. He may sin because his self-control is inhibited by the disease, but the sin is not tied to the disease. So as we've said before, if a person has something going on in his life that disrupts his life, he might sin because he's short-tempered and because he's not getting any sleep, or he coughs all the time, or he's having all these physical problems. They might give him the opportunity or the conditions to sin more easily, but the physical thing that's happening to him is not causing him to sin. In psychology, it's the other way around. If a person has been diagnosed with ADHD or OCD or any other mental illness, it is precisely because he's exhibiting moral or sinful or unusual behavior. His thoughts, motives, feelings, and behavior is all that is used to make the diagnosis in the first place. For more information on this, go to the Biblical Counseling Coalition website and type in mental illness in their search engine. And they'll talk about that. And my view of it is, and I don't remember what the Biblical Coalition group says, but my view of it is that mental illness doesn't really exist. Mental illness is what people call behavioral issues in the psychological world. And the reason they call it mental illness is because it keeps it in the realm of science. Psychologists and psychiatrists desperately want behavioral issues to be scientific. And because that's a realm that's unique to the scientists. Us regular people can't do anything with it if we have it up here in the medical realm. And so they keep it up there. So from the perspective of man A, from our perspective, man A is living according to his feelings rather than according to biblical principles. He does not see God in his circumstances, Romans 8:28. He believes that if he could only change his feelings, his life would change. He's been told that he has a chemical imbalance. This may be, but there has been no measurable or testable proof to verify this diagnosis. Have you ever heard of anybody having a chemical imbalance in their brains? Next time you hear that, ask whoever says it what tests were given to show that that's true. And you might even Google that and say what tests show that my dopamine levels are off or my serotonin levels are off. What tests could I take? And sometimes people will say, well, this behavior shows that your dopamine levels are off or your serotonin levels are off because that's what it always shows. So we've done 1,000 tests, and every time the guy does this, and we did all the tests, it showed that his dopamine levels were off, and when we give him more dopamine, he stops doing that. But show me anytime anybody's ever been tested for their dopamine levels. It doesn't exist. They have no way of checking the chemical levels in your brains. They can give you medication, and they can say that this medication is affecting those things, and then when you stop doing this, that must be why. It's because you're getting medication that does it. But in the tests that I've seen, where they have a double-blind test, where they have people taking placebos, so they have 1,000 people, let's say, and 500 of them get nothing, just sugar, and the other 500 get this medication, psychotropic medication. At the end of the results are exactly the same, which shows that this group is just as liable to have the placebo effect as this group is, because everybody, like 80% are helped in both groups, or 60% or whatever. So there's no tests for that. Now, from our perspective, I said that already, man A is living according to his feelings. God's not in it. He's been told that he has a chemical imbalance. This may be, he might have a chemical imbalance, but there's no way to know. Dopamine and serotonin are the most recent culprits in the chemical imbalance game. Eric Kandel, MD, a Nobel Prize laureate and professor of brain science at Columbia University, believes it's all about biology. All mental processes are brain processes, and therefore all disorders of mental functioning are biological diseases, he says. The brain is the organ of the mind. Where else could mental illness be if not in the brain? Kandel adds, social and environmental factors are undeniably important to understanding mental health, but they do not act in a vacuum, he says. They act in the brain. So the theory is that if you have something going on physically, you have a mental illness. Because your brain is sick, you are ill. But I would say that there's a spiritual component to our brains, our minds, that are not our brains. They're connected somehow. I don't know how it is. But the Bible talks about them being separate-ish things. Our brains are physical things in our heads. And so I would want to distinguish between mental, moral things and brain things. So a guy who gets clunked in the head with a stick and it bangs his head, and now he does weird things because he had brain damage, it's not the same thing as mental illness in anybody's book. And I would say that mental illness is a spiritual problem, brain damage is a physical problem. They're different. So the theory is that the brain is filled with chemicals interacting with one another, firing off. And when something with our behavior goes awry, it's due to too much or too little of the of various chemicals. But again, this is all theory, not fact. The introduction of medication may improve a person's mood, feelings, and by extension behavior, but this does not mean that the problem was chemical in the first place. It could be a placebo effect, a change of heart or choice about mood, or it could be that the person's behavior changed his chemical situation. It could be that the chemicals change things. But it could be that changing the medication gave him the desire or whatever to change his heart, to heart change. It's similar, I think, to people who find out, let's say they find out you're dying, and you're going to go, well, our friend that just died yesterday, or the day before yesterday, Bob Latham, he became a Christian after, or either just before or just after he found out he had cancer. And a bunch of us wondered if it was really a conversion. It was really a real conversion, or did he just do this because he's dying and he knows he's going to go to hell if he doesn't convert, so he's going to convert. We believe that he actually genuinely changed and actually genuinely became a Christian. But you could have a change of heart, or at least appear to have a change of heart because of the circumstances of your life. So you could get these psychotropic medications and appear to, at least, or maybe even this, they literally scare the hell out of you and you repent and come to Christ because of the medication. But the medication isn't doing it. God is doing it through your heart change. So the obvious question arises, but what if it's proven that chemicals do cause symptoms to change? That would mean that if we were able to test for chemicals in the brain and we would give the disease a name and have a specific medical treatment. We don't have any of that now. It could be someday we find out that they're all right. I don't know. But it still doesn't change whether God is in there changing hearts or not. The Bible talks about it differently. The heart and the mind are not the brain. They're different. They interact somehow, but they're different. When you encounter someone on meds, you might pay attention to how they talk about the medication. So ask the following questions. What tests were run to prove the physical problem is present? How did the test prove the diagnosis? I just asked that. What tests did you get? You're taking these medications to help you with this physical thing that you're doing or not doing. What tests were run to see if you needed this medication in the first place? And how was it shown to you that the physical condition has caused your emotional or behavioral state? What did you learn that? What's going on there? How does the medication help your condition? Oftentimes, medication just simply numbs you. People who are having trouble with ADHD, where you're having trouble with your attention and you're really hyper and all the kinds of symptoms that people exhibit when they're diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, or obsessive compulsive disorder, or a lot of other ones. A lot of the medications they get for that simply numbs them. It dumbs them down. It makes them blah and the world turns into gray. Everything used to be colorful and exciting. Now it's gray and blah. That's what the medication does to their brains. And they think they're being fixed or helped because everything is calmed down. And there's a sense in which being calmer does help you, but it doesn't solve the problem. And nobody that I know of thinks that it does. Everybody that I know of thinks that all it's doing is medicating or dealing with the symptoms that you have. So how does the medication help? Does the medication change your relationship to God? Or how does the medication change your relationship to God? So does it? If it does, how? When will you be able to come off the medication? That's another, I think, a really good question. Because if the medication is their God, or the scientific process or the psychological process has become their God, or the thing that they're worshiping in, then we need to talk about that. Where is Jesus in all of this? We'll just ask that a lot. Where is Jesus in all this? Is the medication? I think a Christian can take medication for things. I do. I think that's fine. But we want to be making sure that Jesus is Lord, not the medication, or especially not the system that it's in. These questions will most likely not help your friend in the counseling context, but their answers will be good for understanding what your friend is hoping and trusting in regarding their life situation. And the answers will also help you know how to pray for them. However, I would be careful as you ask these questions, because the person may become defensive or distraught depending on the answers they give. Sometimes it's almost like you're touching their eyeball. You're touching their God. You're messing with the thing they're trusting their life for. They believe these medications are actually helping them, and when you start asking questions like this, it rattles them sometimes, and they get defensive about that. So I would say just be careful about that. Most people assume the meds that they're on are needed, and to ask questions indicates a possibility that they might have placed their trust in the wrong God. Knowing this can either help you in your ministry with them or get in the way. You need a lot of wisdom when you're asking these questions. So I don't ask them all at once. I would maybe ask over several visits or something like that. What is this medicine doing for you? Why are you taking it? And also, most of the time, My own conclusion about all of this is that there genuinely is such a thing as attention deficit disorder. I genuinely think people have is not the right word. I think it's a behavioral kind of thing. I think it's a brain thing. It's not a behavioral thing. It actually is a brain thing that produces behaviors. But I think there is, in the psychological world, there is bipolar disorder 1 and 2. 1, I think, is a brain thing. Schizophrenia, at some levels, a lot of levels, is a brain thing. It's something wrong in your brain. Obsessive compulsive disorder sometimes, I think, is a brain thing. ADHD sometimes is a brain thing. But in some of those, the overwhelming vast majority of times, it's not a brain thing, it's a spiritual thing. It's a choice thing. The person who washes their hands 50 times a day is doing it for a reason. Right? You can't go from like where you're sitting right now, where I'm standing right now. I can't go from here someplace where there's water and wash my hands without choosing to. And there are reasons that I'm choosing to, right? And so if I'm making choices to do something that's over and over and over and over and over, I'm still making a choice to do it each time I do it. And since they're choices, God can get in there and change my mind about stuff. I can realize that I don't need to wash my hands again. I don't need to check the lock on the door again. I don't need to do all these things that a minute ago I thought I needed to do. And I don't need drugs to do that. I just need to change my mind. So I think there are people whose brains are actually, I want to say bent, to not sound psychological or scientific-y. Their brains are actually bent. There is a brain problem that drives them to these things. But the vast majority of people, it isn't that way. It's a question of response. It's the balloon squish. It's the bubble coming out of the balloon squish thing that says I need to wash my hands 30 times a day, or I'm just going to be a mess, or I need to scratch my head every time I turn around because it's just the part of the balloon squish, and it shows up in the list of symptoms as these psychological criteria. And those things can be dealt with biblically. You can say, why are you doing what you're doing? And then with the idea about, I think I may be off my track here, but I'm running out of time, so that's okay. At the end of the day, when people are taking medications for things, I just work with them with those things. I don't say, go to your doctor and stop taking those meds. I do ask a ton of questions about them. Do you need them? Why not? And you have to be really careful here because a lot of times people hate taking them. Really careful. So everybody that I've met who's been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, for example, you buy a book you go to Amazon and you look at bipolar disorder, how to help someone on bipolar disorder, or Google it, how to help people with bipolar disorder, and you get a book on the topic. The book will be about how to keep them on their meds. It's not about how to help them with the disease. It's how to keep them on their meds because people who are taking it hate the meds. Because the meds, so your mood is here. Let's say normally, our normal mood is here. And bipolar people, they go high, and sometimes they zoom off into psychosis where they're just totally out of control. But then when their body runs out of juice, they run out of adrenaline and they run out of stuff to do bad, sinful things, they rocket down into depression, and it's just awful. Then they commit suicide and all kinds of horrible things down here, and then they come back up and they're normal for a while, at this level for a while. But the medications they take, usually like lithium or something like that, the medication they're on drops them down to here, and they're just dull. Everything is dull. The colors turn to gray, and it makes them feel slow, and their brains are slow, and they're lethargic, and it's hard to get out of bed, and it's just awful. It's an awful thing. And then there are side effects to that make them feel bad in other ways. You can get diarrhea, or you can get constipated, or you can get all kinds of other side effects that happen because of this medication that brings you down here, and people hate that. And this is wonderful, really wonderful. If you ever meet anybody who's going manic, they are having the time of their life. It's just wonderful. It's just that early on, it's wonderful, but up here somewhere, it shifts into really sinful. And then here, it's really sinful, and it's really awful, and you call the police and you say, could you scoop up my friend? And they say, no, I can't until they break the law. And then you say, can you watch them for a while? Because they're going to break the law any minute. And they break the law, and they scoop them up, and they send them to Lewiston. But all of the treatment is to keep them down here. So I don't tell people who are on psychotropic medications to stop it. But when people are taking medications, I say, let's work with that. Let's work with you on that. Or let's say somebody has another brain problem that I think is a brain problem, like autism. I don't know a whole lot about autism, but I know some people who have it. If it's something you have, I don't know if it's a brain problem or a behavioral problem or both. I'm thinking it's a brain problem. But I say, well, let's talk about how to live. And so this is what the counseling is. Let's talk about how to live with the situation that God has you in. How can you live in a way that you love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength in this situation that you have? Let's say it's a bipolar person. How can you live in a way that glorifies God? When you're up here, it's clear that you can do that easily. When you're right here, you're doing a good job. But when you're here, you're not loving anybody anymore. And when you're here, you're not loving anybody anymore. And when you're in the middle, you're not loving anybody anymore. So the best thing that you can do to love people, in my opinion, is to take your medicine and love everybody right down when you're down here. And part of your loving your neighbor and loving God is by taking your medication and staying on it. And then we get people to help them with that. Everybody says, how can we help? And sometimes people say, I don't want to bother people. It would be bothersome to have people come and spend time with me every day, to come to my house and make sure I get up and get dressed and get moving and get to work and all that kind of stuff. And I say there's, at least around here in our fellowship, in our church, there's a whole lot of people sitting around wondering how they can help somebody. If only I could help somebody. It would be so wonderful. I'm just sitting here worshiping God, and I see all these people around who are just crazy, blessed with wonderful gifts. They teach and they talk and they go on TV and they do all this kind of cool stuff. What do I have? What do you have for me? And I say there are people around who need someone to come to their house in the morning and help them get dressed and get out of bed, and there are people in our church who want to do that kind of stuff. So I tell the person who's having these troubles, there are people who want to serve you, but you won't let them serve you. You need to make your ministry letting them help you. You don't have any other ministry. You need people to help you. And as weird as it is, I tell myself that, because in a few months I'll probably need, and maybe years, I don't know, need someone to help me. I'll need people to help me. And I have to humble myself and let people serve God by serving me. I'm serving them by letting them serve me. That's what we did with Eileen when she was dying. We let people come and pray with her and sing with her and sit by her and hold her hand and take her down to Lewiston for chemo and bring her back from Lewiston for chemo and stuff. We let Eileen let them serve her, and she served them by letting them serve her. Does that make sense? And we just need a lot of that. So there are people with autism, let's say. Somebody's got functioning autism where there's different levels of autism where people are just in a ball in a corner and they can't do anything, and they're just stuck. But there are a lot of other functioning people with autism that they just do quirky things, right? So you're able to talk to them, and they're thinking. They just don't understand why everybody treats them so weird. It's because they're weird, and they don't know that. It's just strange. So I think you just be honest with them, and you say, okay, so you have this thing where you think this way and you talk this way. You need to believe the people around you about your situation. Read your Bible, just like everybody else. Serve God, just like everybody else. Bow your knee to Him, submit to Him, love Him, and believe that He tells you He's created you this way. Say, this is wonderful the way He's created me. This is a glorious gift from God. The hand of God is in my life. And now I'm going to live with all my brothers and sisters in a way that glorifies God and lives with them in a way that lets them help me live in a way that helps them. So you live with what you have. In the same way that when we suffer, it might be a kind of suffering for them to say no to their urges and desires, to not do weird things. They know what they're doing. Don't do that, or do it differently, or do it in a way that everybody appreciates. Something like that. Sometimes people have great mental abilities, and they just need to learn to live with what they have. You would do that if you lost a leg, right? You're walking down the street, you get hit by a car and you lose your leg. Well, now what do? You used to be a marathon runner. Well, in front of God, you have to learn to live with only one leg. And it's the same way with all these mental things. So somebody's taking medication, I say, let's live with the problem, in front of God with the problem. And if the medication is because of moral, sinful things that are going on in your life, and they're the balloon squish kinds of things, where the balloon squishes cause you to sin in such a way that these mental issues have popped out. They're not brain issues, but they're mental issues that the world is calling mental illnesses. And those symptoms and the reasons that they gave you that diagnosis go away because you're walking with God now. And it happens a lot. Which is why I don't think everybody who has been diagnosed with OCD has a brain problem. They often have sinful problems. The balloon squish. I say then those symptoms go away, and they go away for a while, and they become natural for you to not sin in those ways anymore. So a person who's washing their hands 80 times a day is not doing it anymore, or checking the locks on their door, all the kinds of things that people do when they do that. Well, then let's go talk to your doctor. Go talk to your doctor about taking you off the meds. You may not need them anymore. But I wouldn't say to them, go stop taking your medications. It's just, let's just worship God and walk with God and live with God and live with what God's given you and glorify God with what you have. And if it turns out that you don't need the meds anymore, then go ask your doctor about taking you off of them, or if that's a good idea or not a good idea, and glorify God in the whole process. Notes. Who needs notes? Anyway, so do you have any questions about that? How are we doing? Yeah, we got. Yeah. So I've thought about this this is for the counseling world, but I think it's also the way you live when it's in your family. I don't know if anybody here has kids or something that has these kinds of things going on, but sometimes part of helping them is to learn to live with the differences that they are. Sometimes you might call them weaknesses because they're not the same as everybody else. But one of these that I think is it's pretty. I don't know how prevalent it is, but in my family, my father had dyslexia. He couldn't read. I don't know exactly. I know I've studied it a little bit what dyslexia is, but it's different for each person that I know that has it. So some people, they'll look at a sentence or a word and all the letters are jumbled. Their brain does something when they look at it, so the letters are all out of order and they can't actually read. Or sometimes they're flipped around backwards, or sometimes they're not even letters at all. And my dad had it, and he could hardly read at all. He could read, but it took him forever to get anything. It was really slow. He was an architect, and it took him years and years and years to pass the professional architect's exam because he kept failing the history part, which required reading. At the same time, he had a degree in architectural engineering, so he was an engineer. He could read numbers. Numbers were no problem at all. And as weird as that is, there's letters in math, right? So A plus B equals C, or A prime plus B prime equals, that kind of, A squared plus B squared equals C squared for triangles. And so he helped me with math all through school. He could do math. He could do it with letters in it, but he couldn't read English. He couldn't read those stuff. My sister was coming home from school one day. She went to the community college and was taking drafting stuff. And she got lost because they had they took a tree down near the off-ramp that she got off the freeway on because she didn't read the signs. She saw the tree. It's time to get off here, there's that tree. And they took the tree down while she was at school, and she went right past the off-ramp and didn't realize it until, a long time passed. She went, wait a minute, I missed. And she didn't know how to get home, so she was lost. And my brother had it. My son-in-law has it. Well, how do you live in a world when you read something and you can't read it? Everything's jumbled. I've known of people who have put on particularly colored glasses. The lenses are colored, like yellow or green or red or something. And they put them on and everything makes sense. How does that work? I have no idea. There's something going on in your brain that does that. And I think if you have children who have that kind of thing, or some kids are really good at math and some kids are really good at English and spelling, some kids are good at all these different things, how do we live with them? And I think it's similar. We live in the front of the face of God with the gifts and abilities He's given us, and we strive with every fiber of our being to glorify him in the situation that we have. We have cancer, we live with cancer. We have something else, we live with something else. If we're dying, we're dying. If we live, we live. If we're whatever it is, we're worshiping God and glorifying him forever. And we need to not fight against. I think there's a wisdom call here. How much do you fight against the things God's given you, and how much do you accept it and live with it? And I think it's a mixture of both at different times. But either way, at the end of the day, we rejoice in the Lord always, and we call upon his name, and we sing and dance, and we rejoice.